On the island of Poveglia, between the years 1348 and 1630, Venetian records confirm that more than 160,000 people were sent here to die of plague. When the sickness did not kill them fast enough, they were burned alive on open pyres, their ashes mixed into the soil. Centuries later, in 1922, an asylum was constructed directly on this ground. 8 years after it opened, the doctor in charge told colleagues he could hear voices rising from beneath the floors at night, calling his name in dialects centuries old. In 1930, he climbed the island bell tower and fell to his death. Locals say he was not alone when he fell, and fishermen still refuse to sail here because their nets come up heavy with bone fragments from an island that is no longer land, but remains. The foundation. The Venetian lagoon stretches across 220 square miles of shallow water between the Adriatic Sea and the Italian mainland. Within this maze of channels and islands lies Venice itself, built on 118 small islands connected by more than 400 bridges. But there are other islands in the lagoon, islands that do not appear on tourist maps, islands with no bridges. Poveglia sits 2 miles south of the main city, a crescent-shaped piece of land covering 17 acres. In the 14th century, it was nothing remarkable. A small community lived there. Vineyards, a church, perhaps 40 families at most. But its location made it valuable for reasons those families could not have anticipated. When the Black Death reached Venice in March of 1348, the city faced a problem of mathematics and terror. The plague killed so quickly and so completely that bodies piled faster than they could be buried. Traditional graveyards overflowed within weeks. The stench of decay filled the canals, and the Venetian Republic, built on trade and reputation, could not afford to let the world see its streets lined with corpses. The Senate met in emergency session on April 2nd, 1348. The minutes still exist in the Archivio di Stato di Venezia. They record a simple decree. All plague victims, living or dead, were to be removed from the city immediately. They were to be taken to the outer islands, and they were not to return. Poveglia was close enough to reach by boat, but far enough that screams would not carry to the city. It had no strategic importance. No wealthy families owned land there. The existing population could be evacuated. The Senate seized the island under emergency powers on April 9th, 1348. Within 3 days, the first boats arrived. The historical record describes these vessels as lazaretti, quarantine boats painted black. They moved through the canals at night, collecting the sick and the dying from homes marked with red crosses. Entire families were taken. Children who showed no symptoms were taken alongside parents already in the final stages. The Senate's logic was brutal and clear. If one member of a household had plague, the household was condemned. The boats unloaded at Poveglia's southern shore. There were no doctors waiting, no treatments, no shelter beyond what already existed. The island became what historians now call a deposito, a dumping ground. People were left on the beach. Some walked inland. Most did not make it far. By summer of 1348, thousands had been brought to Poveglia. The original population had fled or died. The plague victims outnumbered any possibility of care. According to a report filed by the Senate's health magistrate in July of 1348, conditions on the island had become unmanageable. Bodies lay unburied. The sick crawled over the dead, and those still healthy enough to realize what was happening tried to swim back to Venice. Boats were sent to patrol the waters around Poveglia. Their orders were to turn back anyone attempting to leave. Several patrol logs survive. They describe people wading into the lagoon, begging to be taken home. The boats did not stop. By autumn of 1348, the Senate made a second decision. Burial was no longer practical. The island's soil could not accommodate the volume of dead, and decomposition posed its own health risk. On October 14, 1348, the Senate authorized the construction of burning pits. The pits were dug on the northern side of the island, downwind from Venice. They were rectangular, approximately 30 feet long and 12 feet deep. Historical accounts describe layers of bodies separated by layers of wood. When a pit was full, it was set alight. The fires burned for days. A Venetian physician named Giovanni di Pagolo documented the process in a letter dated November 1348. He had been ordered to inspect the island and report on sanitary conditions. His letter describes smoke visible from the Venice docks. He describes the smell, which he said resembled neither wood nor flesh, but something that made his throat close. He describes finding living people lying among the dead, too weak to move away from the pits. He recommended immediate closure of the island. His recommendation was ignored. The plague returned to Venice in 1361, then again in 1375. Each time the boats went to Poveglia. Each time the pits were reopened. By 1380, the island had become permanent infrastructure. No longer an emergency measure, but policy. A place built into the bureaucratic machinery of survival. The final major outbreak occurred between 1624 and 1630. By this point, Venice had refined its system. Quarantine laws were codified. Health magistrates had legal authority to seize property and detain citizens. Poveglia was listed in official documents as an isola di purificazione, an island of purification. The language had changed. The function had not. Records from the 1625 outbreak estimate that 20,000 people were sent to Poveglia in a single summer. The pits burned continuously for 18 months. A Senate report from 1626 notes that ash from the fires had begun to change the island's soil composition. The ground, they wrote, had turned gray. After 1630, the plague did not return to Venice in epidemic form. Poveglia was abandoned. The buildings collapsed. The pits filled with rainwater and sediment. Vegetation grew over the burn sites. By the 18th century, the island was legally classified as terra infetta, infected land. It was marked on navigation charts with a warning symbol, "Do not approach." But people did approach. Fishermen worked the waters around Poveglia. Their nets dragged the lagoon floor, and beginning in the 1700s, there are consistent reports in fishermen's logs and harbor records of nets coming up fouled with fragments that were not stone. A complaint filed with the Venetian Maritime Authority in 1743 describes a fishing crew that pulled up remains they identified as human. The log notes that the crew refused to fish those waters again. Similar complaints appear in 1769, 1791, and 1803. Each time, the authorities noted the location. Each time, it was the waters directly off Poveglia's northern shore, where the pits had been. There is another detail in these records, a detail that appears too frequently to dismiss. The fishermen reported hearing voices from the island at night, voices that carried across the water despite there being no one living there, voices that spoke in words they could not understand. A harbor master's report from 1824 includes testimony from a fisherman named Marco Donato. He stated that while anchored near Poveglia at dusk, he heard what sounded like dozens of people speaking at once. He described it as a low murmuring that rose and fell like chanting. When he moved his boat closer to identify the source, the sound stopped. he stated he would not return to those waters. The harbor master noted in the margin of the report that this was the 6th such complaint filed that year. The island was not empty of sound. It was not empty at all. The pattern emerges. For nearly 3 centuries after the last plague, Poveglia remained untouched. The Italian state inherited the island when Venice fell to Napoleon in 1797. It was surveyed, declared unsuitable for agriculture, too contaminated for residential development. The decision was made to leave it abandoned, but in 1920, the Italian Ministry of Health proposed a new use. The nation's psychiatric hospitals were overcrowded. Venice needed additional capacity. And Poveglia, despite its history, offered isolation and existing infrastructure. On March 12, 1920, construction began on a psychiatric hospital complex. The architectural plans are preserved in the Venice Municipal Archives. They show a main building positioned on the northern third of the island. 3 stories, 60 beds, administrative offices, a chapel. And in the center of the complex, incorporated into the design, was the island's old bell tower, the only structure from the original settlement that still stood. The plans do not indicate what lay beneath the construction site, but soil surveys conducted in 1958, nearly 40 years later, revealed that the main hospital building sat directly atop the largest of the medieval burning pits. The foundation posts were driven through layers of compacted ash and bone. The hospital opened in May of 1922. The first patients arrived in June. They were men and women diagnosed with severe psychiatric conditions, transferred from facilities in Venice and the surrounding provinces. The hospital was considered modern for its time. Large windows, access to outdoor spaces, a staff of 12 nurses and 3 doctors. Within 6 months, the staff began filing unusual incident reports. The reports are stored in the archives of the Venice Health Authority. They describe patients experiencing identical symptoms despite being housed in separate wards with no contact. Night terrors, claims of hearing voices beneath the floors, refusal to enter certain rooms, particularly those on the north side of the building. Patients would become violent when forced into these spaces, screaming about burning and smoke. A report dated January 1923, written by head nurse Giulia Mancini, describes a patient named Luca Moretti. He had been transferred to Poveglia with a diagnosis of depression and suicidal ideation. According to Nurse Mancini, Moretti was lucid and calm during intake, but on his first night in the North Wing dormitory, he began screaming that the floor was hot. He claimed he could smell burning flesh. When staff examined the room, they found nothing unusual. The floor was cold. There was no smell, but Moretti refused to stop screaming. He tore at the floorboards with his hands until his fingers bled. He kept saying that people were underneath, that they were burning, that they needed to be let out. Moretti was sedated and moved to a different room. The incident was noted as a psychotic episode, but over the following weeks, 3 other patients in the same dormitory reported similar experiences. All described heat rising from the floor. All described the smell of smoke. None of them had been told about Moretti's episode. Another report from April 1923 describes a female patient named Sophia Barone. She had been diagnosed with hysteria and admitted following a breakdown after her husband's death. According to the report, Barone was nonverbal for her first 2 weeks at the hospital. Then one night, she began speaking. But she was not speaking Italian. Staff noted that her words sounded like Latin. A priest was brought to listen. He confirmed that some of the phrases were Latin, specifically phrases used in last rites. But Baroni had no religious education. She had never been taught Latin. The priest asked her to repeat what she was saying. According to his written statement, she said, "Libera nos a purgatorio." Free us from purgatory. When asked who was speaking through her, she said, "All of them." These incidents were initially dismissed as manifestations of mental illness, but the pattern continued. By 1925, the hospital's staff retention rate had dropped significantly. Nurses were resigning after only months of employment. Exit interviews, when they were conducted, mentioned the same issues, patients reporting the same hallucinations, doors opening on their own. The persistent sound of bells ringing at night, despite the bell tower mechanism being broken. A maintenance log from September 1925 notes that the bell tower was inspected after multiple complaints about ringing. The examination found that the bell's clapper had been removed years earlier. There was no mechanism by which the bell could ring. Yet staff and patients continued to report hearing it, particularly between midnight and 3 in the morning. In 1926, a new director was appointed to oversee the hospital. His name was Dr. Paolo Adriano. He was 43 years old, a psychiatrist trained in Milan. By all accounts, he was rational, methodical, and skeptical of supernatural explanations. He believed the reports of strange occurrences were the result of mass hysteria among mentally ill patients and overworked staff. Dr. Adriano kept detailed journals. They survive in private family archives, and portions have been published in Italian medical histories. His early entries are clinical. He documents patient conditions, treatment protocols, medication schedules. But beginning in 1928, the tone of his writing changes. An entry from March 7th, 1928 describes his experience during a late-night inspection of the North Wing. He writes that he was walking the second-floor corridor when he heard voices coming from below. He initially assumed it was patients in the ground-floor common room. But when he descended the stairs, the room was empty. The voices continued. He describes them as overlapping, like dozens of people speaking at once, too low to understand individual words, but loud enough to be unmistakable. He followed the sound to a storage room at the north end of the building. When he opened the door, the voices stopped. He writes, "I do not believe in ghosts, but I believe something lives in this building, something that speaks." By 1929, Dr. Adriano's journals had become erratic. He wrote about being unable to sleep, about hearing his name called when he was alone, about patients who seemed to know things about the island's history they could not possibly have learned. He began researching Poveglia's past. He obtained records from the Venice archives. He documented the plague years, the burning pits, the location of mass graves. In November 1929, he made an entry that reads, "The hospital is not built on Poveglia. It is built on them, 160,000 of them, and they know we are here." Staff noticed the change in Dr. Adriano. He became withdrawn, paranoid. He stopped attending administrative meetings. He spent hours walking the hospital grounds at night, particularly around the bell tower. Nurses reported seeing him standing at the base of the tower, staring up at it, speaking to himself. On February 3rd, 1930, Dr. Adriano filed a formal complaint with the Venice Health Authority. He requested that the hospital be closed immediately. He stated that the facility was unsafe, not due to structural issues, but due to what he called spiritual contamination. He wrote that the island's history had made it permanently uninhabitable, that the concentration of death had altered the location itself, that attempts to use the land for the living were doomed to failure. The health authority rejected his request. They ordered him to take medical leave and arranged for a temporary replacement. Dr. Adriano refused. He stated he would not leave the island until the patients were evacuated. What happened next is documented in multiple sources: police reports, witness statements, newspaper accounts. But none of them fully explain what occurred on the morning of February 17th, 1930. The peak horror. The bell tower at Poveglia stands 72 feet tall. It is square, built of red brick, with narrow windows at each level and an observation platform at the top. The bell mechanism was removed in the 19th century, leaving only the chamber empty except for the rusted mounting bracket where the bell once hung. Access to the tower required a key kept in the hospital director's office. On the morning of February 17, 1930, Dr. Paolo Adriano was seen entering the bell tower at approximately 7:15. This was witnessed by a nurse named Elena Rossetti, who was beginning her morning shift. She stated in her police interview that Dr. Adriano looked ill. His clothes were disheveled. He did not respond when she greeted him. He simply unlocked the tower door and went inside. Nurse Rossetti thought nothing of this initially. Dr. Adriano often inspected the grounds, but approximately 15 minutes later, she heard shouting from inside the tower. She described it as Dr. Adriano's voice, but he seemed to be arguing with someone. She could not make out the words. Then, there was silence. At 7:33, a patient named Giuseppe Marzi, who was being walked around the hospital grounds by an orderly, pointed up at the bell tower and screamed. The orderly, Antonio Bassi, followed the patient's gaze. He saw Dr. Adriano standing on the observation platform at the top of the tower. According to his statement, Dr. Adriano was pressed against the railing, leaning backward as if someone was pushing him from behind. But there was no one else on the platform. Orderly Bassi shouted up at Dr. Adriano. Other staff members heard the commotion and came running. Within moments, a small crowd had gathered at the base of the tower. They all saw the same thing: Dr. Adriano at the top, struggling against something they could not see. A nurse named Francesca Martini stated that Dr. Adriano appeared to be screaming, though at first she heard no sound. Then suddenly, his voice carried down. She stated he was shouting, "I will not go back down there. I will not go back." Another witness, a maintenance worker named Carlo Venturi, stated he saw Dr. Adriano's body jerk forward suddenly, as if pulled. Then he went over the railing. The fall was 72 feet. Dr. Adriano hit the stone courtyard at the base of the tower. Death was instantaneous. The impact occurred at 7:36 in the morning. The police arrived within the hour. They secured the scene. They interviewed witnesses. They climbed the bell tower to examine the observation platform. The investigating officer, Commissario Vittorio Serra, filed a detailed report. It is preserved in the Venice police archives. The report notes several inconsistencies. First, Dr. Adriano's key ring was still in his pocket, but the tower door, which could only be locked or unlocked from the outside, was locked when police arrived. Someone would have needed to lock it after Dr. Adriano entered. No other keys to the tower were missing. Second, there were signs of a struggle on the observation platform: scratches on the railing, scuff marks on the stone floor. But the platform was only large enough for 2 people at most, and every witness stated they saw Dr. Adriano alone up there. Third, the police found Dr. Adriano's journal on the platform. It was open to the final entry, dated that morning. The entry read, "They want me to see what they saw. They want me to fall the way they fell, into fire. I can hear them now, all the time, beneath everything. This island is not land. It is a grave pretending to be land, and graves do not forget. Commissario Serra interviewed every staff member. None could explain the locked door. None could explain who Dr. Adriano had been arguing with, and all of them mentioned the same detail. In the moments before Dr. Adriano fell, they heard the bell ring, the bell that had no clapper, the bell that could not ring. It rang once, loud and clear, and then he went over the edge. The official cause of death was listed as suicide. The case was closed. But Commissario Serra added a note to his final report. He wrote, "This investigator finds the physical evidence insufficient to support the conclusion that Dr. Adriano acted alone or of his own free will. However, no alternative explanation can be substantiated." Following Dr. Adriano's death, the hospital descended into chaos. Staff refused to work night shifts. Patients became increasingly unmanageable. Incidents of violence escalated. Within 3 months, 6 nurses and 1 orderly had resigned. Replacements could not be hired. Word had spread through Venice about what had happened, about the voices, about the doctor who fell from the tower. In June of 1930, the Italian Ministry of Health conducted an inspection. The inspector's report is extraordinary in its frankness. It states that while the facility meets basic standards for patient care, the staff are psychologically compromised, and the patients are experiencing shared delusions of alarming consistency. The report recommends immediate closure. But the recommendation came with a problem. Where would the patients go? Venice's other facilities were already overcrowded. Transferring 60 patients on short notice was logistically complex. So, the ministry delayed. The hospital remained open through the summer of 1930. Then, in August, something happened that made closure inevitable. A patient named Matteo Ricci attacked 3 staff members in a single incident. Ricci had been a relatively calm patient, diagnosed with melancholia. But on the night of August 9th, he barricaded himself in the North Wing dormitory with 2 other patients. When staff tried to enter, he began throwing furniture at them. He was screaming about the floor opening, about hands reaching up from below, about fire. It took 4 orderlies to restrain him. During the struggle, Ricci grabbed a nurse by the throat and said something that was recorded in the incident report. He said, "They are under us right now. They have been under us the whole time, and they are not resting. They are waiting." The nurse, whose name was redacted in the report, required medical treatment for bruising. Ricci was sedated and isolated, but the incident was the final catalyst. On September 1st, 1930, the Ministry of Health ordered the hospital's closure. All patients were to be transferred by month's end. The island was to be abandoned. Again. The evacuation was completed by September 28th. The last staff members left on September 30th. The doors were locked, the windows boarded, and Poveglia was declared off-limits by provincial decree. Trespassing was officially prohibited. Coast Guard patrols were assigned to monitor the island and turn away unauthorized boats. But the story did not end with closure. Because even abandoned, Poveglia remained active. Coast Guard reports from the 1930s and 40s describe repeated incidents of lights seen in the hospital windows at night. Boats that drifted too close to the island reported engine failures. Fishermen continued to avoid the waters around Poveglia, and their reasons remained the same. The nets caught things that should not be there, and the voices carried across the water after dark. In 1946, the Italian government considered demolishing the hospital and clearing the island for redevelopment. A survey team was sent to assess the structures. They lasted 3 hours. According to their report, they experienced equipment malfunctions, including compass failures and inexplicable temperature drops inside the buildings. One surveyor reported hearing screaming from the bell tower. When the team investigated, they found the tower empty, but they also found something else: fresh scratches on the observation platform railing, scratches that had not been there in 1930. The demolition plan was abandoned. Poveglia would remain as it was. The legacy and unresolved terror. Poveglia Island today is legally classified as zona off-limits, an off-limits zone. Landing on the island without authorization is a criminal offense punishable by fine and possible imprisonment. The hospital buildings are still standing, though in advanced decay. The bell tower remains, and the Italian government maintains its position that the island is unsafe due to structural instability and environmental contamination. But that is not the reason people stay away. Since the hospital's closure in 1930, there have been numerous attempts to investigate, document, or simply visit Poveglia. Almost all of them have ended in failure, not due to legal intervention, but due to something else. In 1968, a paranormal research team from the University of Bologna obtained permission to spend 3 nights on the island. They brought electromagnetic field detectors, thermographic cameras, and audio recording equipment. The team consisted of 5 researchers, all trained scientists. They arrived on the afternoon of October 12, 1968. They left before dawn on October 13th, less than 18 hours after arrival. The team's report, published in a limited circulation academic journal, describes consistent equipment failure. Cameras malfunctioned. Recording devices produced only static. EMF detectors showed readings that fluctuated wildly without pattern. But the report focuses primarily on what the researchers experienced directly. All 5 team members reported hearing voices inside the main hospital building. The voices spoke in multiple languages, including what the team identified as Venetian dialect, Latin, and medieval Italian. None of the researchers were fluent in these languages, yet they all reported understanding fragments of what was being said. Pleas, prayers, accusations. The team also reported physical sensations, sudden temperature drops of up to 20 degrees, feelings of pressure on their chests. One researcher, whose name is listed as Dr. Stefano Caruso, reported being touched by something he could not see. He described it as hands gripping his shoulders from behind. When he turned, there was nothing there, but his colleagues saw distinct impressions forming on his jacket as if invisible fingers were pressing into the fabric. The team attempted to spend the night in the main building, but by 11:45, conditions had become unbearable. Dr. Caruso reported feeling violently ill. Another researcher began hyperventilating. The decision was made to evacuate to their boat. They spent the remainder of the night anchored offshore. At first light, they returned to Venice. The report concludes with a statement that reads, "This team cannot scientifically explain the phenomena experienced on Poveglia Island. However, we can state with certainty that the location is psychologically hostile to human presence. Whatever the cause, whether environmental factors, mass suggestion, or something beyond current understanding, the island should not be inhabited." In 1992, an Italian television crew attempted to film a documentary about Poveglia. They obtained special permission from the Venice municipal authorities and arrived with a full production team. They planned to spend 1 week on the island, conducting extensive filming of the buildings and conducting historical research. They completed less than 2 days of filming. The production was abandoned after the crew's sound engineer, a man named Luca Romano, had what the medical report describes as a severe panic attack while recording audio inside the hospital chapel. According to witnesses, Romano suddenly removed his headphones and began screaming. He claimed he had heard hundreds of voices speaking at once through his equipment, all saying the same thing: "Leave." Romano was evacuated to the mainland and hospitalized briefly for shock. The production company declined to complete the documentary. The footage they did capture has never been publicly released. Most recently, in 2008, a group of urban explorers illegally accessed the island at night. They posted video footage online before local authorities had them removed. The videos show the decaying hospital interior, graffiti, collapsed ceilings, and in several frames, anomalies, shadow figures that appear in doorways and vanish, orbs of light that move against the direction of the camera. And in one video, recorded in the bell tower, a sound clearly audible in the background, the sound of a bell ringing. The urban explorers were fined and banned from the Venice lagoon, but their experience matches the pattern: brief intrusion, disturbing phenomena, rapid departure. Contemporary fishermen still refuse to work the waters immediately around Poveglia. Coast Guard reports note that boats give the island a wide berth, even though its location makes it a natural waypoint for lagoon traffic. The reason is the same as it has always been. The nets catch fragments, and the voices carry. In 2014, a soil analysis was conducted on samples taken from the northern section of the island. The study was part of an environmental survey of the Venetian lagoon. The results showed that the soil composition in that area is approximately 50% human ash by volume, not scattered ash, not traces. 50%. The ground itself is human remains. The Italian government has periodically considered proposals to repurpose Poveglia, turn it into a park, a memorial, a resort. Every proposal has been rejected or quietly abandoned during the planning phase. Those familiar with the island's history suggest the same reason. No one wants to be responsible for what might happen if the island is disturbed again. Because the pattern is clear. For nearly 700 years, Poveglia has resisted human use. Every attempt to occupy the land, to build on it, to make it serve the living, has ended in abandonment. The plague years, the asylum, the research teams. The pattern does not change. And the most disturbing aspect is not what happens on the island, but what the island suggests about the nature of place and memory. Can land remember suffering? Can it retain the imprint of mass death? At what point does history stop being past and become present? The voices heard on Poveglia are not random. They speak the languages of the dead buried there. They repeat the prayers and pleas of people who were abandoned to burn. They emerge from beneath structures built directly atop the sites where those people died. This is not haunting as folklore or metaphor. This is haunting as evidence. Evidence that some places cannot be reclaimed, that certain thresholds, once crossed, cannot be crossed back. Poveglia received 160,000 dead across 3 centuries. They were not honored. They were not mourned. They were burned and buried and forgotten. And the island, saturated in ash and bone, became something other than land. It became a wound, and wounds do not heal when they are continuously reopened. Poveglia Island is still there, 17 acres in the Venetian lagoon. You can see it from the Venice waterfront on clear days. The bell tower is visible above the tree line. The buildings are collapsing slowly into the earth. The Italian government continues to prohibit access. The fishermen continue to avoid it. And at night, when the lagoon is quiet, there are still reports of sounds carrying across the water. The question is not whether Poveglia is haunted. The question is what we mean by haunted. If haunting is the persistence of the past into the present, then Poveglia is proof that such persistence is not supernatural but inevitable. 160,000 people died there. Their remains are the island. And what is memory if not remains? We build on the dead constantly. Cities, roads, farms. All of human civilization is constructed atop layers of those who came before. But most places have graves. They have markers. They have some acknowledgement that death occurred there. Poveglia has nothing. No graves, no markers. Only ash in the soil and bones in the water, and voices that will not stop speaking. The island waits. It has always waited. And it will continue to wait, because it has nothing but time. And the dead, it seems, have learned patience. If you go to Venice, you can hire a boat. You can sail past Poveglia. You can see the bell tower. You can anchor offshore at dusk. And if you listen carefully, you might hear what the fishermen hear. The sound that has been reported for 300 years. The sound of people speaking from an island where no one lives. And if you hear it, you will understand why the boats do not stop. Why the island remains abandoned. Why some places are not meant to be reclaimed. Because Poveglia is not empty. It is full, and what fills it does not rest.